He told me anyone could write emotional fluff. He said it with a sneer, a slight curl of his lip that I had seen 1,000 times before. It was the same expression he used when a waiter brought him the wrong kind of sparkling water, or when a fan at a book signing got a little too emotional. It was a look of casual, effortless dismissal, a look that said, "You are a thing, and you are an inconvenient thing." For 10 years, I had been the ghostwriter for Julian Croft, the self-help guru whose face was plastered on airport bestsellers and the banners of corporate wellness retreats. I wrote the words that made him a millionaire. I crafted the sentences that made CEOs weep with gratitude. I built his empire of empathy from a cramped corner in my apartment that smelled perpetually of burnt coffee and anxiety, while I juggled overdue rent notices and prayed my ancient laptop wouldn't finally die. And when I asked for a modest raise, a tiny fraction of the value I was creating, he fired me. Just like that. In his sleek, minimalist office that I had helped him design the talking points for, he erased a decade of my life with a single, contemptuous phrase. What he'd forgotten, in his airtight bubble of arrogance, was that for those same 10 years, he'd been using my personal email account to correspond with his most sensitive, high-profile clients. He couldn't be bothered with their emotional clutter, so he'd outsourced his compassion to me. He had, in his laziness, given me a private, direct line to the very people who believed he was a genius. He had built my reputation for me, in the shadows. He thought he'd just fired his ghost. He had no idea he'd just created his replacement. I'm not going to leak his secrets. I'm not going to write a bitter tell-all. I'm going to do something much, much worse. I'm going to publish my own book, filled with testimonials about my wisdom from his clients, and I'm putting my name on the cover. If you've ever poured your soul into something just to have someone else sign their name to it, or if you've ever been told your greatest skill was just fluff, let me know in the comments. It really does help to know that you're not just screaming into the void. It helps to know you're not alone. The walk from his glass tower office back to my apartment was a blur of concrete and indifference. The city didn't care. The crowds of people rushing past, each wrapped in their own urgent narrative, didn't know that my world had just been neatly folded up and put away like old laundry. I remember my keys feeling foreign in my hand, the lock on my own front door a sudden, stubborn stranger. I stepped inside and was hit by the silence. It was a loud silence, the kind that rushes in to fill a vacuum. For 10 years, that silence had been my canvas. It was where I spun Julian's folksy wisdom, where I turned his vague, half-formed platitudes into chapters that felt like a warm conversation with a wise old friend. Now the silence was just an accusation. I didn't cry. Not at first. I sank onto my worn-out sofa, the one with a permanent dip on the left side from a decade of late nights and impossible deadlines. I just sat there, staring at the blank beige wall. My mind, usually a frantic workshop of metaphors and sentence structures, was terrifyingly still. It was like a factory where the power had been cut. All the humming, whirring machinery had ground to a halt. There was no next chapter to write, no urgent email from a panicked CEO to answer on Julian's behalf, no manuscript to polish until it shone with his reflected glory. There was just me, and the terrifying, echoing question, what was I without his name to hide behind? It wasn't about the money. That's what I told myself, and it was a plausible inaccuracy, a lie we tell ourselves to maintain a shred of dignity. Of course, it was partly about the money. It was about the gnawing anxiety of checking my bank balance, the quiet humiliation of my debit card being declined for a bag of groceries, all while knowing the words I'd typed that very morning were generating 6 figures in speaking fees for him. But it was more about the erasure. The slow, creeping, decade-long process of becoming invisible. Julian hadn't just taken credit for my work, he had consumed my professional identity. I was the voice, but he was the face. I was the architect, but he lived in the mansion, and I had let him. That was the part that truly stung. I had been a willing participant in my own disappearance. My finger, moving on its own, tapped the icon for my email. Old habits. For a decade, my life had been a series of notifications, each one a summons from Julian's world. I started scrolling, a numb archaeologist digging through the ruins of my own career, and the flashbacks started, not as gentle memories, but as sharp, painful jolts. I saw the first contract. I was so young, so hungry. I'd just been laid off from a junior editor position at a small press that went under. I saw Julian as a savior. He was charismatic, with a vision. He said, "We're going to build something that helps people, Clara." And I believed him. I remember the thrill of seeing the first book, The Compass Within, on a shelf at a bookstore. I picked it up, my heart pounding. I ran my fingers over his name, embossed in gold foil. I had written every single word in that book, from the dedication to the index. I'd even written the little bio about his love for sailing, a sport he'd tried exactly once and hated. I bought a copy, and the cashier said, "Oh, I hear he's amazing." I just smiled and said, "Yes, he is." I felt a surge of pride, a secret, potent knowledge. It felt like being a spy on a successful mission. It hadn't yet started to feel like being a ghost at my own funeral. Then another email, from 5 years ago. The subject line was just, urgent. It was from Julian, the night before his first big national television interview. He was in a hotel room in New York, having a full-blown panic attack. He couldn't remember the core tenets of his own philosophy. He called me, his voice thin and reedy. I was in my kitchen, eating a bowl of cereal for dinner. For an hour, I sat on my cold linoleum floor, calmly talking him down, feeding him his own lines, my lines, reminding him of the anecdotes I'd invented about his supposed childhood struggles. I was his emotional ballast, his human teleprompter. The next morning, I watched him on TV. He was magnetic. He repeated my words, my stories, with such profound conviction. He even used the little joke I'd written for him to break the ice. The host was captivated. The camera loved him. And I was just a voice on the phone, 1,000 miles away, eating leftover cereal and feeling a cold, heavy knot forming in my stomach. It was the first time I realized I wasn't his partner. I was his infrastructure. And infrastructure is only noticed when it breaks. A different memory surfaced, sharper this time, a printout of a magazine interview from 2 years ago, Forbes. The headline was, "The Quiet Wisdom of Julian Croft." In the article, he unveiled a new concept he was developing. He called it the Foundational Five, Anchors for an Anxious World. It was a brilliant, simple framework for emotional regulation. It was also the exact framework I had developed and pitched to him for the next book, a concept he had initially dismissed as too academic. I remember reading his quote, my blood turning to ice. He said, "It came to me one morning while I was meditating. It was just a gift from the universe, a moment of divine inspiration. I was sitting at my desk, the very desk where I had spent 3 months meticulously building that divine inspiration, from research, client feedback, and my own soul. I had the documents, I had the email threads, but he had the microphone, he had the byline. The universe, it seemed, had an unlisted ghostwriter. This was the part that people would never understand. Why did you stay? They would ask. Why did you tolerate it for a decade? It's a logical question with an illogical answer. My loyalty wasn't to Julian. It had stopped being about him years ago. My loyalty was to the work and, more importantly, to the people on the other end of the emails. This was his most brilliant and ultimately most foolish delegation. Early on, he'd set up a rule in his own inbox. Any email containing keywords like help, struggling, advice, or question was automatically forwarded to my personal address, clark.thorne@gmail.com, with a CC to him. His inbox remained a pristine, manageable space for agents, publishers, and media requests. Mine became a triage unit for the human heart. He told the clients, "My dear friend and associate Clara handles the flow of my correspondence to ensure I can focus on the deep work. Just email her directly. She's my right hand." Over time, the CC to Julian became a BCC, and then it dropped off altogether. The clients, these titans of industry, decorated generals and famous artists, just knew to email Clara. Julian never read their raw, vulnerable messages. I did. I was the one who sat up until 2 a.m., crafting a response to a tech CEO terrified of her next board meeting, the one who found the right words for a politician grappling with a public failure, the one who coached a musician through a creative block. I lived inside their fears with them. Julian just cashed the checks their gratitude generated. And that's where I found her. Evelyn Reed. As I scrolled through the graveyard of my inbox, her name glowed. Evelyn was the CEO of a revolutionary biotech firm, a woman who regularly graced the covers of the magazines that had interviewed Julian. To the world, she was a titan, an unflappable genius. In my inbox, she was just a woman terrified of being found out. Her first email to me, 3 years ago, was forwarded by Julian with the note, "Clara, handle this Fluff. She's a big fish, so be nice." The email from Evelyn was short. "Dear Julian, I admire your work. I find myself in a position of great responsibility, yet I feel like a fraud. Any advice would be appreciated." I knew Julian's response would have been a canned paragraph about embracing authenticity, copied and pasted from chapter 3 of his second book. I couldn't do it. Instead, I wrote back from the heart. I didn't offer solutions. I just acknowledged the feeling. I told her the feeling of being an imposter wasn't a sign of weakness, but a symptom of a deep-seated integrity, a fear of not living up to the standards you've set for yourself. It's the curse of the competent. The truly fraudulent never feel like frauds. Her reply came back in minutes. "Who is this?" I explained. I was Julian's associate, Clara. She wrote back, "Well, Clara, that's the first thing anyone has said to me about this that doesn't feel like a greeting card." And so it began. For 3 years, Evelyn and I had a quiet, consistent correspondence. We never spoke on the phone. We never met. But through the sterile medium of email, we built a profound connection. I became her strategic advisor, her confidante. I helped her prepare for shareholder meetings, navigate corporate betrayals, and most importantly, manage the crushing weight of her own success. Julian had no idea. He just knew that Evelyn Reed's company kept renewing its executive wellness contract for an astronomical sum. He thought his genius was keeping her loyal, but his genius had an unlisted email address. It wasn't a conscious strategy. It wasn't a long con. It was just me doing the work, building relationships, earning trust. It was the very work he had dismissed as fluff. And as I sat there in the dark of my apartment, the full weight of my termination settling into my bones, I scrolled and scrolled, reading my own words reflected in the praise of others. I had built a body of work, a portfolio of proven success, a network of powerful people who trusted me implicitly. I just hadn't realized it because my name wasn't on the door. Then I saw it, an email from Evelyn dated 6 months prior. I'd helped her work through a particularly vicious attempt by a board member to oust her. My advice had been precise, strategic, and calm. It worked. Her follow-up email wasn't just a thank you. It was a diagnosis. "Clara," she wrote, "you have a gift, and it's not for writing fluff. It's for seeing the architecture of a person's fear. You don't just soothe it. You analyze it. You map it out, and you show them how to build a stronger foundation over it. It's a form of engineering, emotional architecture. I hope one day you build something for yourself with it." Emotional architecture. The phrase hit me like a lightning strike. It was everything I did. It was the perfect description for my process, my philosophy, the very thing Julian had never bothered to understand. He sold comfort. I built resilience. A cold, clean clarity washed over me, displacing the grief and the shock. The factory in my mind wasn't just back on, it was retooled, rebooted with a new and singular purpose. Evelyn's words were the catalyst. They were the spark that ignited the dry tinder of a decade's worth of resentment. The despair didn't just vanish, it transmuted. It hardened into a diamond-sharp resolve. He thought he had erased me. He thought he had taken my livelihood, my purpose, but he had only taken away the cage. I looked at the thousands of emails in my archive, the direct private conversations with some of the most influential people in the world. He had forgotten about them. He had forgotten that he'd given me the keys to his kingdom, and he had forgotten that all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't write a single authentic sentence to save his life. It wasn't about revenge. I kept telling myself that. It wasn't about destroying Julian Croft. It was about building Clara Thorne. It was about honoring the validation I had received in secret. It was about finally building something for myself, with my own name on the blueprint. The greatest mistake Julian ever made wasn't firing me. It was his profound systemic laziness. He didn't just outsource the work. He outsourced the relationships. He saw his high-paying clients not as people, but as revenue streams, and their emotional needs as an administrative burden. So he directed that burden to my personal email address, an address I'd had since college, an address that had absolutely no legal connection to his corporation. In his mind, I was just a tool, an extension of his will. The idea that my inbox had its own existence, that it was my private property, would have been as foreign to him as the concept of humility. He had, with his own lazy instructions, created a perfect, off-the-books archive of his own obsolescence. My inbox wasn't just a collection of emails, it was a signed confession. It was proof that for a decade, the real work, the work people were paying a fortune for, was being done by me. The first thing I did wasn't to start writing, it was to call Anya. Anya and I had survived a brutal introduction to post-structuralism class in university by trading notes and sharing cheap pizza. I had gone on to wrestle with words for a living, and she had gone to law school to wrestle with the words that govern everything else. She was now a partner at a boutique firm specializing in intellectual property, and her wit was as sharp as her billing rate was high. We met at a small, quiet coffee shop, the kind with mismatched furniture and serious baristas. I laid out the whole story, the 10 years of ghosting, the low pay, the firing, the sneer. I watched her face, her lawyer's mask of professional neutrality firmly in place, but I could see a storm gathering in her eyes. Then I told her about the email account. I told her about Julian directing his clients to my personal Gmail and the years of correspondence I had amassed. She took a slow sip of her macchiato, her eyes narrowed in thought. "Okay," she said, putting the cup down with a soft click. "Let's be clear. This is messy. A legal purist would argue that since you were acting as his agent, the work product, including the correspondence, belongs to his company." My heart sank, so he could sue me. He could take it all. "He could try," Anya said, a slow smile spreading across her face, "and it would be the stupidest thing he could possibly do." Clara, think about the discovery process. Think about a lawsuit where his entire business model gets put on trial. A lawsuit where dozens of his highest-paying clients get subpoenaed to testify about who exactly they were confiding in. He would be opening his kimono to the world, and it would turn out he's not wearing anything underneath. He will never, ever sue you. A threat? Absolutely. A C&D letter? Almost certainly. An actual lawsuit? Not a chance. It would be professional suicide. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "But we're not going to steal his data. We're not going to leak his clients' secrets. That's amateur hour. We're going to do something much more elegant. The words of praise, the testimonials, the expressions of gratitude sent to you about your advice, that's your social proof. He can't claim ownership of Evelyn Reed's opinion of you. That's hers to give, and yours to receive. So here's what you do. You reach out to a select few, the ones you have the strongest relationships with. You tell them you're stepping out on your own. You ask for their permission to use their words of support, anonymized or not. Their permission is your shield. It neuters any claim he could possibly make." The plan was audacious, terrifying, and beautiful. It wasn't about exposing him. It was about using the truth he had tried to bury as the foundation for my own ascent. It felt clean. It felt right. While I began the delicate process of drafting those emails, I also activated the other part of my quiet network. For years, I had been the point of contact for the publisher. Not just for edits, but for logistics, scheduling, and smoothing things over when Julian missed a deadline. I had developed a good working relationship with many of the junior staff, people who, like me, did the real work in the background. My closest contact was a young woman named Maria, a bright, ambitious junior editor who had always been a little too curious about my role. She'd once cornered me in the hallway at a launch party and said the prose in the second half of the new book is so much tighter. Julian must have had a breakthrough. I just smiled, but she knew. She had the editor's eye. She could see the fingerprints on the words. I took Maria out for lunch. I told her I was leaving the organization. I didn't need to say more. She understood immediately. Her expression was a mixture of excitement for me and schadenfreude for Julian. "It's about time," she said, raising her glass of iced tea. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to build something for myself," I said. "And I could use a friend on the inside, just to know which way the wind is blowing." Maria grinned. "Consider me your personal weather vane. To be honest, we're all a little worried." Julian turned in a draft of his first solo chapter last week. Well, you know his first drafts. It's a mess of platitudes and mixed metaphors, but now there's no one to turn it into a book. He's hired some sycophant from a marketing firm to replace you. The guy's a yes man. He thinks every word Julian utters is gold. The senior editors are starting to sweat. The fall catalog is depending on that book. The information was better than I could have hoped for. The empire was already showing cracks. The architect was gone, and the king was discovering he couldn't even read his own blueprints. The next phase was the hardest. It was the deep, solitary work of creation. For the first time, I wasn't channeling Julian. I was excavating my own ideas. I took Evelyn Reed's phrase, emotional architecture, and made it my own. I started to codify the system I had been using instinctively for years. I laid it out, chapter by chapter. It wasn't about vague feelings or inspirational quotes. It was a method. It was about identifying the load-bearing walls of your identity, understanding the seismic risks of your emotional landscape, and building structures of resilience, not just shelters of comfort. I spent weeks in a creative fever, fueled by cheap coffee and the sheer intoxicating thrill of my own voice. I pulled from my experiences, from the hundreds of problems I had solved in secret. I wrote about the specific fear of a leader who has to project strength while feeling weak, the anxiety of a creator facing a blank page, the quiet despair of feeling like an imposter in your own life. Every point I made, I could back up with a real-world example, a problem I had personally helped solve. Then came the moment of truth. My manuscript was structured. My book proposal was polished. Now I needed the testimonials. My hands trembled as I drafted the email. I chose 5 clients. Evelyn, of course, a retired 4-star general I had helped transition to civilian life, a famous novelist struggling with her second book, a young tech entrepreneur on the verge of burnout, and a respected orchestra conductor who had lost his nerve. The email was simple and direct. It said I was finally stepping out from behind the curtain to write a book under my own name, based on my own philosophy of emotional architecture. I told them that their private words of encouragement over the years had been the catalyst, and I would be deeply honored if they would consider allowing me to use some of their feedback with any level of anonymity they wished, as a testament to the method. I didn't mention Julian once. I didn't have to. The entire premise was built on a truth they already knew, that their connection had been with me. I hit send, and then I waited. The silence that followed was different from the one after I was fired. This wasn't the silence of a vacuum. It was the silence of a held breath. It was the pause before the verdict. I paced my apartment for what felt like an eternity. I refreshed my inbox every 30 seconds. I imagined the worst, that they would feel betrayed, that they would report me to Julian, that Anya's legal confidence was misplaced. An hour later, the first notification pinged. My heart leaped into my throat. The subject line was, a new chapter. It was from the general. "Miss Thorne," it read. "It is I who would be honored. Your guidance was more valuable than any strategy session I attended at the Pentagon. You gave me a framework not just for a new career, but for a new identity. Use whatever you wish. No anonymity required. A good leader gives credit where it is due. It's about time you received yours." I sank onto my sofa, the relief so potent it made me dizzy. I read the words over and over. A good leader gives credit where it is due. The validation was so pure, so direct, it felt like a physical warmth spreading through my chest. Before I could even fully process it, another email arrived, and another. The novelist wrote, "Oh, thank God. I always wondered when you'd get tired of propping him up. Yes, of course. Use anything. Let me know if you need a proper blurb for the cover." The tech entrepreneur simply replied, "Hell yes. What do you need from me?" But it was Evelyn's reply that changed the game. I had been saving it, afraid to open it. She was the keystone. Her response landed in my inbox 2 hours after I'd sent the original message. It was short, powerful, and it altered the entire trajectory of my plan. Clara, it began. It's about time. Not only can you use my words, you can use my name. Full stop. I'll also make a call to my agent. He's an animal, but he's the best. He should be representing you, not that polished suit Julian uses. And one more thing. I'm speaking at the Global Tech Summit next month. It's being live streamed. I want to announce my company is retaining you as our new Chief Resilience Officer and formally endorsing your methodology. We can time it with your book proposal. Let's not just build you a book, Clara. Let's build you an enterprise. I stared at the screen, my vision blurring. She wasn't just giving me permission. She was handing me a battering ram. She was offering to personally kick down the door and hold it open for me. In that moment, I understood the true nature of power. It wasn't about having a famous name or a big platform. It was about the quiet, unbreakable bonds of trust you build when no one is watching. Julian had spent a decade broadcasting to the masses. I had spent a decade talking to individuals. And now those individuals were about to speak for me. Anya connected me with a top-tier literary agent, not Evelyn's, as that felt too aggressive, but a respected one she knew from a rival agency. My new agent, a sharp woman named Sarah, read my proposal overnight. She called me the next morning, her voice electric with excitement. "Clara, this is gold," she said. "It's not a tell-all. It's not a revenge book. It's a genuine, powerful self-help book with a built-in blockbuster marketing angle. The secret guru steps into the light, and the testimonials. My God, having Evelyn Reed's name attached? We're not sending this to Julian's publisher. We're sending it to their biggest competitor. We're going to start a bidding war." It was all happening so fast. I felt like I was standing on a train platform, and a high-speed bullet train I didn't even know I was waiting for had just screeched to a halt right in front of me. Doors open. Everything was quiet, strategic, and moving with a terrifying, exhilarating momentum. It wasn't about revenge, I told myself again, as Sarah drafted the submission letter. It was about stepping onto the track that had always been mine. The first move of the silent takeover wasn't a move I made at all. It was made by the industry itself. Sarah sent my proposal, Emotional Architecture, to 3 of the biggest publishing houses in New York. The response was immediate. The combination of a strong, fresh concept and the jaw-dropping testimonials from people like Evelyn Reed and the General was irresistible. Within a week, we had a 2-book deal on the table for an advance that was more money than I had earned in the entire previous decade. The news hit the industry trade publications a day later. Authentic Voice pioneer, Northwood Press, signs Clara Thorne for Emotional Architecture, a groundbreaking new approach to personal resilience, endorsed by leaders in tech and defense. My friend Maria, the editor, called me the moment the news broke. She was practically vibrating with glee. "You have no idea what you've done," she said, her voice a hushed, excited whisper. The announcement just landed. Clara Thorne. The name meant nothing to most people, but the senior VP of our division saw endorsed by Evelyn Reed, and his face went white. He knew exactly who you were. He called Julian into his office an hour ago. I walked past, and I could hear Julian shouting. He's completely blindsided. She described a scene of pure, beautiful chaos. Julian, red-faced and sputtering, trying to explain how his own ghostwriter had apparently launched a competing brand using his own client list. He was trying to frame me as a thief, a backstabber. But the publisher wasn't seeing a betrayal. They were seeing a business problem. They were seeing a best-selling author whose voice had just signed a massive deal with their direct competitor. They were seeing a man who had not only lost his talent, but had so alienated her that she had become a rival. "He's trying to get them to sue you," Maria continued. "He's screaming about intellectual property and non-disclosure agreements. But our legal department is balking. They're looking at the press release, at Evelyn's very public endorsement, and they're realizing a lawsuit would be a PR apocalypse. They'd have to publicly admit that their star author didn't write his own books, and that the real genius behind the throne now thinks he's a fool. He's trapped." Julian's panic was a distant storm I could hear rumbling on the horizon. He sent me a flurry of emails. The first was threatening, full of legal jargon he clearly didn't understand, talking about tortious interference and breach of fiduciary duty. It was a clumsy, impotent roar. I forwarded it to Anya, who replied with a single laughing emoji. The second email was pleading. "Clara, what are you doing? We were a team. We built this together. There's been a misunderstanding." The whiplash was almost comical. He was cycling through the stages of grief and rage like a malfunctioning sprinkler head. I didn't reply to any of them. My silence, I was discovering, was a far more potent weapon than any angry response. He was shouting into a void, and the echo was just the sound of his own irrelevance. The real power shift came a few weeks later, the Global Tech Summit. Evelyn Reed was the keynote speaker. I watched the live stream from my apartment, my heart pounding. She walked onto the stage to thunderous applause, a sleek, confident figure in a world she dominated. She gave a brilliant speech about the future of human-computer interaction, and then, in her closing remarks, she went off script. "For the last few years," she said, her voice resonating through the massive auditorium, "I've had a secret weapon, a strategic advisor who has helped me navigate the immense pressures of this job. Not with platitudes, but with a rigorous, structured methodology she calls emotional architecture. Her name is Clara Thorne, and she has been the invisible architect behind some of the most resilient leaders you know." A picture of me, a professional headshot I'd had taken the week before, appeared on the giant screen behind her. I gasped. My face was 50 feet high. Evelyn continued, "Her work has been so transformative that my company is creating a new C-suite position for her, Chief Resilience Officer, to integrate her methodology across our entire leadership team. And I am personally thrilled that she is finally stepping into the light with her own book so that everyone can have access to the wisdom I have been so privileged to receive. Thank you." The internet exploded. My name, Clara Thorne, started trending on social media. Tech journalists, industry bloggers, and corporate leaders were all asking the same question: who is Clara Thorne? The story began to piece itself together in public. The connection to Julian Croft was quickly made, but the narrative wasn't the one he would have wanted. It wasn't disgruntled employee steals client list. It was the real genius behind self-help guru Julian Croft finally reveals herself. I was David, but with a book deal instead of a slingshot. The client exodus wasn't an exodus at all. It was more like a quiet, orderly migration. They weren't leaving Julian. They were simply following the source of the value they'd always cherished. My phone began to ring with inquiries from other companies, other leaders who wanted to learn about emotional architecture. They didn't want feel-good speeches. They wanted the structured, practical wisdom that Evelyn Reed, a notoriously no-nonsense CEO, had just endorsed on a global stage. That's when Julian made his final, desperate move. He called me. His actual voice on my phone was a shock, after years of emails and one final, dismissive meeting. It was thin, strained. All the booming, confident charisma was gone. "Clara," he said, the words sounding like a plea, "we need to talk. This has all gotten out of hand." He offered me everything. He offered me my job back, at triple the salary. He offered me a full partnership. He offered, and this was the most pathetic part, to go back and have all his previous books reissued with my name on the cover as co-author. "We can fix this, Clara," he said, his voice cracking. "We can put out a statement, say it was a planned transition, a mentorship. People will love it." He still didn't get it. He thought it was about credit. He thought it was a negotiation over billing. He couldn't comprehend that his currency, his name, his platform was no longer worth anything to me. I had minted my own. I listened patiently to his entire rambling proposal. I let him talk himself out, his desperation hanging in the air between us. When he was finally done, there was a long, heavy silence. "No, Julian," I said, my voice calm and even. "We can't fix this, because there's nothing broken. You have what you've built, and I have what I've built." I ended the call. I agreed to meet him for coffee. It was my one concession, a final, necessary closing of a door. I chose the place, a neutral hotel lobby downtown, a place with no memories for either of us. I arrived first and chose a small table in the corner. When he walked in, I was startled by how much smaller he seemed in person, away from the flattering lights of a stage or the grandiosity of his office. His expensive suit seemed to hang off him. The confident stride was gone, replaced by a hesitant shuffle. He looked like a man who had misplaced his own shadow. He sat down, avoiding my eyes, and fumbled with a sugar packet. He started with flattery, praising my bold move, my impressive strategy. He was trying to reframe it as a game we were both playing, as if I were a clever student who had finally learned from the master. I just sipped my water and let him talk. When the flattery didn't work, he pivoted to threats, a diluted version of his angry email, mumbling about lawyers and reputations. It was like watching a child try on his father's oversized coat. The authority just wasn't there anymore. Finally, he slumped in his chair, defeated. "Why, Clara?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "After all these years, why would you do this to me?" I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time, without a filter of awe or fear or resentment. I just saw a hollow man, a man who had become a brand, and in the process had forgotten how to be a person. I put down my glass of water. "You did this to yourself, Julian," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "I didn't steal anything from you. I just stopped letting you steal from me." He opened his mouth to reply, to argue, but I wasn't finished. I leaned in just a little, and for the first time, I let a sliver of the cold, hard anger I had buried for a decade show in my eyes. "You told me that anyone could write emotional fluff," I said, repeating his own words back to him. The sneer was gone from them now. They were just a statement of fact. "It turns out you were right. I could. The problem for you is, you can't." I stood up, leaving my full glass of water on the table. I didn't look back. I walked out of the lobby and into the bright, clear afternoon, and I felt a decade of weight dissolve from my shoulders. It was over. 2 months later, my book, Emotional Architecture, was released. It debuted at #1 on the bestseller lists. The launch was a media event, driven by the irresistible narrative of the guru's ghost stepping into her own power. I was on the morning shows, not as a disembodied voice in a panicked author's ear, but as myself. I was praised for my authenticity, my practical, no-nonsense approach to resilience. The fact that I had been the secret source behind Julian Croft wasn't a scandal. It became my greatest asset, a testament to my experience. It was a story of empowerment, and people were hungry for it. The final piece of vindication came in an email from Maria. The subject line was simply, "Timber." She told me that Julian's publisher had officially invoked the morals clause in his contract and dropped him. His last book, the one he had tried to write with the sycophant, had been an unsalvageable disaster. His brand was now toxic, forever linked to deceit and inauthenticity. The man who had built an empire on the concept of truth had been undone by it. He hadn't been destroyed by a vengeful plot. He had simply become obsolete, a casualty of his own arrogance. It wasn't about revenge. I smiled as I archived her email. It was about gravity. The truth, like all things with weight, eventually finds its own level. My new office is in a spare room in my apartment. It's not a sleek, minimalist temple of glass and steel. It's warm, and it's filled with books, and the window overlooks a small park where I can watch the seasons change. There are no overdue rent notices anymore. I'm on a video call with Evelyn Reed. We're not client and advisor. We're collaborators, partners, laughing about a ridiculous article we both read. We are equals. On the wall behind my desk, there is a single, simple frame. Inside it is the cover of my book. My name, Clara Thorne, is printed in bold, clean letters. It's my name. It's my work. It's my voice. And I'm talking to you now. This story isn't just about ghostwriting or the self-help industry. It's for anyone who has ever been the silent architect of a success they weren't allowed to claim. It's for every person who has poured their heart and their intellect into something, only to be told their contribution was secondary, that it was support, that it was fluff. Your work has value. Your wisdom has value. Your unique way of seeing the world, the very thing that nobody else can replicate, has immeasurable value. Do not let anyone, no matter how powerful or charismatic, convince you that you are invisible. Do not let them borrow your light and call it their own sunshine. Your voice is yours. Your name is yours. Build something with it. So if this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt like your name deserved to be on the cover of your own life, do me a favor and like this video. Leave a comment below and tell me about a time you reclaimed your own narrative. It helps more than you know to build a community around these stories and to remind each other that we're not alone in these fights. Share this video with anyone you know who needs to hear that their fluff is actually a foundation. And please, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story about rewriting the rules and taking back your own power. Thank you for listening.